Hello, and welcome to the Well-Read Monocle. Today, we are stepping into the shadows of one of the most formidable collections in horror history, Stephen King's Night Shift. First published in 1978, this anthology collects 20 of King's earliest short stories, tales that are raw, relentless, and often devoid of happy endings. In this video, I'm going to take you through the collection story by story, from the opening epistolary dread of Jerusalem's lot to the quiet heartbreak of the woman in the room. We'll unravel the plots, meet the characters, and examine the nightmares that King unleashed upon the world. Story 1, Jerusalem's Lot. We open with the collection's prequel to Salem's Lot, a story told entirely through letters and diary entries written in 1850. The protagonist is Charles Boone, an aristocrat who has moved into his ancestral home, Chapelwaite, in Maine, accompanied by his manservant, Calvin McCann. Charles is plagued by the sounds of rats in the walls, or so he thinks. He soon discovers a map of a deserted nearby village called Jerusalem's Lot. Curiosity leads Charles and Calvin to the village, a decaying, Puritan settlement dominated by a desecrated church. Inside, they find an obscene altar and a blasphemous book, De Vermis Mysteries, The Mysteries of the Worm. Charles learns that his own ancestor, James Boone, led a cult there, worshipping a subterranean entity. The story reaches its climax when Charles and Calvin return to the church to destroy the book. They are confronted by the undead corpse of James Boone and a massive, worm-like entity beneath the church. Calvin is killed, and though Charles escapes, he is a broken man. The story ends with Charles preparing to take his own life, believing he is the last gateway for the evil to re-enter the world. It is a classic Lovecraftian tale of ancestral curses and forbidden knowledge. Story 2, Graveyard Shift. Hall is a drifter working the graveyard shift at a textile mill infested with rats. The foreman, Warwick, is a sadistic bully who orders Hall and a crew to clean out the sub-basement, a damp, hellish place that hasn't been touched in years. As they descend, the rats get larger and more aggressive. Hall discovers a trapdoor leading to a sub-basement. He forces Warwick down into the darkness with him. There, they discover a mutated ecosystem, rats the size of dogs and bats that have evolved to lose their wings. In the final confrontation, Hall uses a high-pressure hose to force Warwick toward the Magna Mater, the giant, legless queen rat. As Warwick is devoured, Hall attempts to flee, but he is overwhelmed by the swarm. The story ends with the cleaning crew on the level above wondering where the men went, preparing to descend into the darkness themselves. Story 3, Night Surf. A superflu known as Captain Trips has wiped out most of humanity. We follow a small group of teenagers wandering a beach. The narrator, Bernie, is with his girlfriend Susie and a few others. They have just burned a man alive, a stranger they found sick with the flu, in a primitive, superstitious sacrifice. Bernie reflects on his past and his relationship with Susie, whom he doesn't particularly love. The horror here is quiet and existential. By the end, Bernie reveals that he and his friends have been lying to themselves about their immunity. The story concludes with Bernie watching the surf, accepting that the end is inevitable. Story 4, I Am the Doorway. Arthur is a crippled former astronaut who lives in Florida. After a mission to orbit Venus, he was exposed to an alien mutagen. Years later, he reveals the horror to his friend, Richard. Tiny, golden alien eyes have grown into the flesh of his hands. These eyes are sentient. They use Arthur as a doorway to see our world, which they despise. When Arthur loses control, the alien presence forces him to commit murder, killing a young boy. When Richard sees the eyes, he is terrified. The alien presence lashes out, killing Richard with a bolt of energy. The story ends with Arthur revealing his desperate solution. He has burned his hands in a kerosene fire to blind the entity. But the victory is short-lived. He looks down to see a perfect circle of 12 golden eyes has now opened on his chest. Story 5, The Mangler. In this gruesome tale, a police officer named Hunton investigates a fatal accident at an industrial laundry. A worker, Mrs. Frawley, was pulled into a massive speed ironer and folded to death. Hunton and his friend Jackson, an English professor, deduce that the machine is possessed. Through a series of unfortunate coincidences, blood from a cut, belladonna from an antacid, and a virgin's hand caught in the gears, the machine has been summoned to demonic life. They attempt an exorcism, but they make a fatal error in the ritual. The machine doesn't just stop, it rips itself free from the concrete floor. The story ends with the machine prowling the streets, searching for fresh prey, while Hunton watches in helpless horror. Story 6, The Boogeyman. Lester Billings sits in a psychiatrist's office, unburdening his soul. He tells Dr. Harper about the deaths of his 3 young children. All were officially ruled as crib deaths or accidents, but Billings knows the truth: they were killed by the Boogeyman. Billings describes how each child cried out about a monster in the closet. He ignored their fears, trying to toughen them up, only to find them dead with their necks broken. He eventually used his last child, Andy, as bait to save himself, fleeing the room when the creature attacked. After his confession, Billings gets up to leave. He returns to the office to find the nurse gone. The closet door opens, and the Boogeyman steps out, still holding the mask of Dr. Harper. Story 7, Gray Matter. Set during a snowstorm, a group of old-timers in a convenience store are approached by a terrified boy, Timmy Grenadine. He claims his father, Richie, is changing. The narrator and the store owner, Henry, go to investigate. They learn that Richie drank a bad can of beer and has been slowly transforming into a gray, fungus-like blob. He sits in the dark, eating dead cats and demanding warm beer. When they confront Richie in his apartment, he is no longer human, he is a mindless, dividing mass of gray jelly. The men flee as the creature bursts out of the room, multiplying. The story ends with them implying they will burn the building down to stop the spread. Story 8, Battleground. Renshaw is a professional hitman who has just murdered a toy maker. When he returns to his penthouse, he receives a package, a G.I. Joe Vietnam footlocker sent by the victim's mother. But these are no ordinary toys. The tiny soldiers are alive, armed with working miniature weapons, helicopters, and rocket launchers. Renshaw fights a desperate war in his own living room, wounded by tiny bullets. Cornered in the bathroom, Renshaw tries to burn them out with lighter fluid. The resulting explosion blows the penthouse apart. The story ends on the street below, where a couple finds a scrap of Renshaw's shirt, riddled with hundreds of microscopic bullet holes. Story 9, Trucks. In a roadside diner, a group of strangers is trapped by a rebellion of machines. Semi-trucks have become sentient and are circling the parking lot, crushing anyone who tries to escape. The trucks demand fuel, honking in Morse code. The humans realize they have no choice but to comply. The narrator describes the horrific realization that humanity has been enslaved. The story concludes with a vision of the future where humans are forced to pave the world and maintain the machines, working until they drop. Story 10, Sometimes They Come Back. Jim Norman is a high school teacher haunted by the past. Years ago, his brother Wayne was murdered by a gang of greasers in a train tunnel. Now, students in Jim's class are dying or dropping out, only to be replaced by transfers who look exactly like the greasers who killed his brother, and who haven't aged a day. Realizing he is facing the undead, Jim performs a ritual to summon a demon of his own. He calls upon the spirit of his dead brother. The ghost of Wayne arrives, not as a victim, but as a vengeful force, dragging the greasers into the light of an oncoming spectral train. Story 11, Strawberry Spring. The narrator recalls a strawberry spring, a false spring in New England that brings thick fog. During one such spring 8 years ago, a serial killer named Springheel Jack terrorized his college campus. Now, the fog has returned, and so have the murders. The narrator's wife is crying because she found something disturbing in his car. The story ends with the narrator admitting that during these foggy nights, he doesn't remember where he has been, implying that he is Springheel Jack. Story 12, The Ledge. Stan Norris has fallen in love with the wife of a crime boss named Kressner. Kressner catches him and offers a wager: if Stan can circumnavigate the narrow ledge of the penthouse apartment, 43 stories up, he can have the wife and the money. If he refuses, he will be framed for heroin possession. Stan steps out onto the ledge. He battles the wind, the cold, and a pigeon that pecks at his ankles. He manages to make it all the way around. When he re-enters, Kressner reveals the wife is dead anyway. Enraged, Stan overpowers Kressner, takes his gun, and forces the crime boss out onto the ledge to perform the same feat. Stan waits to see if Kressner will make it. Story 13, The Lawnmower Man. Harold Parkett hires a landscaping service to cut his overgrown lawn. The mower arrives, a naked, pot-bellied man who crawls on all fours behind the lawnmower, eating the cut grass. The lawnmower man reveals he is a satyr, a servant of the god Pan. When Harold tries to call the police, the lawnmower man chases him down. The story ends with the police finding Harold's remains in the birdbath. Story 14, Quitters Incorporated. Dick Morrison wants to quit smoking. He visits Quitters Incorporated, a firm with a 98% success rate. The head of the firm, Donati, explains their method: pragmatism. If Dick smokes, they will hurt his family. First a mild shock to his wife, then beatings, and worse. Dick is terrified but compliant. Months later, he slips up. True to their word, Quitters Incorporated finds his wife and shocks her while Dick is forced to watch. Dick eventually quits. The story ends years later when he meets a friend who recommended the program. They shake hands, and Dick notices the friend's wife is missing her little finger, the penalty for a relapse. Story 15, I Know What You Need. Elizabeth is a college student studying for finals. She meets Ed Hamner, a quiet, intense boy who seems to know exactly what she needs at every moment, from a strawberry ice cream cone to the answers for a test. She falls in love with him, but her roommate Alice becomes suspicious. Alice investigates and discovers Ed is using black magic to spy on Elizabeth and manipulate her life. Elizabeth confronts Ed, destroying his charms and breaking his control, leaving him desperate and alone. Story 16, Children of the Corn. Bert and Vicky, a bickering couple, are driving through rural Nebraska. They accidentally run over a young boy, only to discover his throat was already cut. They take the body to the nearest town, Gatlin. The town is deserted of adults. They find a calendar indicating that 12 years ago, the children killed everyone over the age of 19. The children belong to a cult worshipping he who walks behind the rose. Vicky is captured and sacrificed. Bert flees into the cornfield, where he stumbles upon the skeletons of the town's adults. In the end, he is killed by the massive, red-eyed monster that inhabits the corn. Story 17, The Last Rung on the Ladder. We shift gears now to one of the few non-supernatural stories in the collection, a poignant tragedy about memory and regret. Larry, a successful, high-powered lawyer, receives a suicide note from his estranged sister, Kitty. She has jumped from an insurance building in Los Angeles. The news sends Larry into a spiral of guilt as he recalls a single, pivotal day from their childhood in the family barn. He remembers how they used to play a dangerous game, climbing a rickety ladder to a high beam 70 feet in the air and jumping into the hay below. One day, the ladder broke while Kitty was clinging to the top rung. Larry frantically gathered hay, running back and forth to build a small pile below her while she held on for dear life. When the rung finally gave way, Kitty dropped. She landed safely in the hay Larry had piled up. She later told him she didn't even look down, she simply let go because she knew her big brother would be there to catch her. The story concludes with a devastating realization: as adults, Kitty had been hanging on through failed marriages and depression, waiting for Larry to put down the hay again. But he was too busy with his career to answer her letters. She finally let go, and this time, there was nothing to break her fall. Story 18, The Man Who Loved Flowers. From the tragedy of neglect, we return to the horror of obsession in New York City, May 1963. A young man walks down 3rd Avenue. He is radiantly happy, and his joy is infectious. Everyone who sees him, from an old woman with groceries to a flower vendor, smiles at him. He stops to buy a bouquet of tea roses, telling the vendor they are for his girl, Norma. A news report on a radio mentions a hammer murderer is on the loose, but the young man pays it no mind. He is simply a man in love. He turns down a dark, narrow lane where he believes Norma is waiting for him. He sees a woman in the shadows and approaches her with the flowers. But as she turns, he realizes she is not Norma. She screams. The young man pulls a hammer from his pocket and bludgeons her to death. It is revealed that Norma has been dead for 10 years. This man in love is the hammer murderer, wandering the streets in a delusional state, killing women who aren't her. He walks away, his name, he thinks, is love, unaware of his madness, convinced he will find Norma next time. Story 19, One for the Road. This story serves as a sequel to Salem's Lot. Two old locals, Tookie and Booth, are drinking in a bar during a blizzard. A frantic man named Lumley bursts in, saying his car is stuck in the snow and he left his wife and daughter behind. The problem is, the car is stuck near Salem's Lot. The men know the village is burned out, still infested with vampires. They reluctantly go to help. When they arrive, the car is empty. They are confronted by Lumley's wife and daughter, who have already been turned. The wife tries to seduce her husband, and the daughter floats over the snow, revealing fangs. Lumley is mesmerized and taken by them. Tookie and Booth barely escape with their lives, driving away as the vampires watch. Story 20, The Woman in the Room. The final story is a non-supernatural, psychological drama. Johnny visits his terminally ill mother in the hospital. She is in constant pain, and the doctors can do nothing more for her. The story is an internal monologue of Johnny's guilt and love. He finds a bottle of painkillers in her purse. He agonizes over the decision to end her suffering. The story ends on a somber note, implying that he feeds her the lethal dose to grant her the peace she cannot find on her own. And there you have it, the dark, twisted, and often tragic world of Stephen King's Night Shift. From the cosmic horror of Jerusalem's Lot to the quiet, human tragedy of The Last Rung on the Ladder, this collection showcases King's incredible range. He turns everyday objects, laundry machines, lawnmowers, trucks, into instruments of death, and reminds us that sometimes, the monsters are inside us. Thank you for watching the Well-Read Monocle. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark, be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, keep your lights on.